Well, today we have three panellists, and let me introduce them one by one to you. Firstly, coming from Melbourne, a journalist writing from the National Times, a self-professed humanist and atheist, and even sings in a gospel choir for the Baptist Church.
And hypocrite.
Please, you said that. Please welcome Dick Ross. Welcome, Dick.
Pleasure to be here, Pete.
Well, that makes two hypocrites, and I'm not sure, I won't speak on behalf of the others, but we'll see how we go.
Yeah.
Our second panellist, the man behind the, thank you Russ, behind the posters that we've been seeing around Sydney, such as Jesus, Prophet of Islam, the My Peace organisation. Please welcome Diaa Mohammed. And the third speaker, weighing in at 105 kilograms.
At least.
None other than Ian Powell, who is part of the City Bible Forum team, and has actually also been part of a group called Aussie Christians that have tried to respond in an appropriate manner to the posters that Diaa has been putting up. Now, possibly behind me on the screen, you might see some of these posters that have been going up of late around Sydney. The one from Diaa, the one from Aussie Christians, and also actually some atheists have put up a poster in Queanbeyan encouraging us to say no religion in the forthcoming census. And it was quite funny that, independent of our asking Diaa to join this panel, both Dick and Ian appeared on the Sunrise program discussing whether or not such a billboard in Queanbeyan should be allowed. So, all those background events happening this month. It's great that we've now got the three protagonists together sitting next to me. So the theme today, does religion always lead to extremism? So I thought it'd be appropriate that we first get down to some definitions. Dick, you are an atheist, you're committed to that. Does that make you an extremist?
Well, my view about extremism is that and I know there'll be discussions about this definition, but it has pejorative overtones. Extremism is an adjective, or a noun, actually it's a noun, isn't it?
Noun, yeah.
It's a noun, but it's usually only deployed when there's a discussion about violence, people going too far. And my view on that is that extremism is not limited to godliness or godlessness. Both the godly and the godless can be extreme and violent. And in this context, I put up my hand and say that the godless have to take some responsibility in the background of our narrative about the Soviet-era killing of a mere 30 million, maybe more.
Okay, give or take a few.
Give or take a few, 10 or 20
Well,
million.
we might get into a little bit more about your sordid past in a moment.
Yes. But
so extremism has sort of two sides to it.
That's right. But I think in this context, it's really about unspeakable violence that has been practiced by the godly and the godless. I think the common denominator are several. I think the first is that it's actually not the ideology or the belief or the faith. It's more about the socio-political background, which is the context for that violence, rather than the various beliefs. But beliefs do have a role to play, and I think beliefs that lack a sense of accountability, where people who have power don't feel that they have to be accountable for that power. And the story I tell is when I went to Auschwitz and was, overwhelmed by the level of violence there. You also got the sense that there was no one actually saying no.
Yeah.
There were no checks and balances. This was absolutely violent thugs in the lolly shop. So it's about accountability. There is danger with evangelical atheists and theists, because if you think you have an idea that's so fantastic you need to take it to other communities, then that's a danger that may be a warrior-like communication of the event. Okay. So they're the issues that I like to raise.
Thank you. I think that's been well expressed. Diaa, you're obviously committed to the Islamic cause, otherwise you wouldn't have invested your own time and resources in these advertising campaigns. So does that make you an extremist?
I think, look, the word has a very well-defined definition that extremism is only associated with Muslims now and Islam, truth be told. So the word extremism has been hijacked a little.
I think that's a fair call.
And now when you say extremists, automatically you say you think Muslims or whatnot. So if there was ever an article saying extremists hit again, automatically you would associate Muslims or Islam with it, which is the whole reason why I've ventured this campaign of putting billboards up, and is to really raise discussion and get people asking. Well, for example, a common unknown is, we as Muslims believe that Jesus is a prophet of God Almighty. And people say, well, that can't be right because we know that Muslims have Muhammad and Christians have Jesus, and where's the two between? And then when they start learning about what Islam is, not necessarily about becoming Muslim or reverting or anything like that, it's more to understand what Islam teaches. And then when you have a greater understanding of what Islam is, you become less afraid, and that fear factor is gone, and that mystical smoke that's around Islam, dissipates, and then it creates a greater tolerance between everybody.
Okay, thank you. Ian, you didn't grow up as a Christian. You became a Christian in your sort of later teen years, and then chose to train for Christian ministry. So surely that makes you a bit of an extremist as well.
Yes, I think I'd like to be an extremist. I think the trouble with, as my learned colleagues here have said, the trouble with extremism is it has become a swear word. It's one of those things, no one says, yes, I'm an extremist. They say, I'm a purist, or I'm radical, I'm going back to the heart and soul of it. It's what you call others who you think have gone too far down the road. But really, extremism is a good thing often. You have surgery, you want to have an extremist doctor who's extremely good, who's extremely hardworking, who washes their hands. I mean, extreme sports. There's a very real sense in which Nelson Mandela was an extremist. He was committed to violence at one stage and then extremely patient. Buddha was an extremist, left his wife and kids to seek enlightenment. Jesus was an extremist. The question is extremely what? There are some things where it's good to be extremely truthful, extremely loving. So the question is the thing that you're identifying with going to make you extremely dangerous or not? And that's the question, I think. So I'd like to be kind of more extremely following Jesus more closely, because then I'd be much less obnoxious.
Okay, good. I'm looking forward to that in the office.
Yeah!
Well, the theme, the title of today's session is, Does Religion Always Lead to Extremism? So there are different ways we could cut straight into that topic, but today we're going to do it a little differently to yesterday. I'm going to actually ask Ian a question now, put him a little bit on the spotlight.
You're going to Bible bash me?
I am, yeah. So Christians claim the Old Testament as part of their scriptures. Mm-hmm. It says here in Deuteronomy chapter 7, when the Lord our God brings you into the land you are entering to possess and drives out before you many nations, the Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, etc., 7 nations larger and stronger than you, and when the Lord your God has delivered them over to you and you have defeated them, then you must destroy them totally. Make no treaty with them and show them no mercy.
Right.
So in what sense does this condone Christian violence today?
I'm sort of so glad you brought that up.
You only said that to get a bit of thinking space.
In all this thing, and I know we're all going to feel the same here, these are things that we could well do with much longer to flesh out. But
Sure.
Briefly, I think it's fair to say that the calls to violence in the Bible are all in the Old Testament, and they are all to do with Israel taking possession of that particular land that God gave to Abraham hundreds of years before, but said they weren't allowed to have it because the nations who lived there hadn't lost their right to it because of their sin. And what Israel comes in is both, and it's quite clear there, it's to fulfill the promise to Abraham, but it's also because those peoples were under the judgment of God, as Israel later was when Babylon came in and bashed them nearly to death in the historical process. So that has absolutely nothing to do with me. That was a particular block of land that the God and Father of Jesus said that land belongs to the Jews, to the Israelites, and it makes me wince when I hear it. But in terms of any justification for any later violence, it's utterly irrelevant. It's completely time and geographic specific. And I don't think it's, so I think that's it. It's awkward in our day to hear that, but it's irrelevant to how I'm going to treat my neighbour.
Okay, good. Well, we might take questions further on that, and I do remind you of the SMS option up there, and a few questions are coming through.
Can I rudely interrupt?
Yes, sure. You have. Okay.
Bit of background. Yesterday, Ian went through some of the Islamic texts and gave, for me, and I'm a complete ignoramus on these issues, a fairly convincing, very convincing argument that, there's quite a lot of violence in these Islamic texts, saying, and you should actually to have that discussion again, just for the edification of the audience. And that question is sort of like saying, well, you can say the Quran's got violence, but so is the Old Testament. And Ian would be entitled to say, well, look, it's a second-order document compared to the New Testament, and Jesus was, by and large, pretty weak on violence, pretty hopeless at it, and which is a good thing. But the interesting thing about these two guys is they're having this debate about the role of violence and extremism in their foundation documents. And I found myself saying, I have a completely different view of text. All these foundation documents have got these ideas in them, and they're sort of a bit irrelevant to me. I'm not, it doesn't move my soul that these venerable documents have got both good, bad, wise and stupid things in them.
So you see them as basically human documents that you can draw, presumably, what you will from them. Is that right? Or?
That's right. That's probably putting a more intelligent view on it than I would. But, they're just beyond my sphere of experience. I've read them. I've been brought up with them.
Yeah.
Both of them. And I, like most people, largely don't know what's in them because they're very challenging documents. As for the Quran, my ignorance is irrelevant, is infinite.
Okay, well, we'll turn to the Quran. So I've put Ian on the spotlight, and Diaa, it's your turn. So I'm quoting here from Surah 9:29. Fight those who believe not in Allah, nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which hath been forbidden by Allah and his messenger, nor acknowledge the religion of truth, even if they are people of the book, which I take to mean Jews and Christians, until they pay the tax with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. So is this a justification for violence today?
No, it's not. It's not. Look, so we're talking about two time frames. What that says is giving Muslims rule of law. So what are they calling today? Engagement, rules of engagement, for example. And that's what that is, a rule of engagement. Okay? Wars were nothing out of the ordinary there. The Roman Empire spread in the same way as did the Persian Empire. The Quran does give specific texts. There are verses in the Quran where it says, kill those who fight you. Okay? The Quran says, and hunt them down. Now, there are several different verses in the Quran that does refer to that. But you've got to look at the history of it. When was it revealed and why? For example, when the Muslims migrated from Mecca to Medina, they were being persecuted for 13 years. And for 13 years, the Muslims wanted to fight. But there was no order to fight. It was not a sanctioned war they could have. Then the revelation came down. Now, there were conditions. When the revelation came down, they could fight. There were conditions. For example, no women may be hurt. No children may be hurt. No trees may be cut down. And even when the prisoners of war, when the Muslims won that war, prisoners could not be handcuffed or roped. In fact, they were ordered to eat from the same plate as their captors.
Okay, so if I could just perhaps bring it forward to the present. Yeah. So you've explained well the context in which that came. Yep. Does it apply today? No,
well, the Quran applies throughout time. The Quran is timeless. But the Quran also has revelations for a point of time of that war. For example, so it's not a blanket. It's not a blanket war.
That's the Ian rationale.
But so, can someone apply this today to justify violence? Ian has said with the Old Testament, no. Can you say...
It's in the text. It says, when you fight on the... If you meet a Girgashite, if you're a Jew, and you meet a Girgashite or a Canaanite or whatever else living in the Promised Land...
Yeah, okay. So can we draw the same conclusion that, yes, it had a role back then, but can it still have a role today?
No, it can't. No, it can't still have a role today. The rules of God Almighty are infinite and without time limitations, okay? There are rules that were sent down for particular instances. Islam's law is for all of mankind for all of time, all right? Some verses were revealed only, were sent down for what was about to happen, So you can't take that and say, well, I've got that license to roll. No, you can't. And Islamic, for example, everyone's got this word, fatwas. Not anyone can just derive a fatwa from anything. You simply can't. There are conditions even when you give, the fatwas. So no, you can't pick and choose what you want from the Quran. But I want to be clear, the Quran is timeless. The teachings of it are for all of mankind to the end of time. But there are also verses out there that were specific to a particular war or to a particular time. But it does give a blanket rule, for example, the way you treat Christians, the way you treat Jews. If you were to do this is what you can do. It's a constitution. It's in everything.
Okay.
Can I just... I'm happy to be silent for it.
Maybe just be silent. I want to now put Dick for a moment on the spotlight. You mentioned your trip to Auschwitz, and obviously that has, personal...
I'm from a Jewish background.
Yeah, so it resonates with you personally. And you saw that, for some reason the checks and balances failed, although arguably the Germans at the time were pretty good with their checks and balances, except obviously with a different moral framework. But where is the accountability for you ultimately in your atheistic framework? Why do there need to be checks and balances if there is no ultimate judgment?
The source of good is always something that we struggle to discover. Can one be good without God? And I argue that we can, that there are secular societies that have been very good. I also argue that in recent times there's been moral progress as belief in the divinity may have declined. And once again, if I can cry poverty of time, but if I had longer, I would go through the psychology of what's called, very ugly psychologist term, pro-social behaviour, and the source of pro-social behaviour within our community. It's a bit clunky. I think that atheists generally are underrepresented in philanthropic endeavour compared to Christians. Mm-hmm. People of religions are more likely to be more philanthropic, but because you're talking about good and evil every Sunday, so you're more likely to do it better, and I concede that. But what I don't concede is that goodness necessarily has to be imposed by and inspired by and cajoled by a higher power, and that there are atheists around there who are absolutely perfectly moral. And there are psychological arguments about that. There are arguments about evolution, about the need for cooperation within a species, which is also an argument for why we're still very religious. I know religions in Australia feel quite demoralised, but if you look around the world, humanity is still a very religious species. Mm-hmm. Not so much in England and Australia, but the rest of the world. Okay,
I mean, I'll give you the chance perhaps to come back at me a bit later, but the gist of that seemed to me that there are various accounts that one can provide without religion for moral behaviour.
Yes.
I'm not quite sure, though, we've got to the bottom line of accountability for moral behaviour without a recourse to a higher order, without a recourse to God. But yes. Maybe do you want to come back at me now if you wish on that?
Look, I don't have the glib one-line answer to that. That's actually a very profound issue. All I've got is observations that in a fairly secular society like Australia, there's still a lot of moral pro-social behaviour, a lot of collaboration and cooperation, and, not much violence.
Yeah. Thank God.
Yeah. Touche.
Yeah. There are some questions coming through. This is a slightly different tack, picking up on a comment here about women, and our audience here is probably about 50-50, so this is an appropriate point to raise this question. Ian, track record of Christianity in the treatment of women. Does Christianity suppress women?
I think all religions have a tendency to suppress women. I don't think any... But then actually, put it differently, all societies suppress women because they're physically weaker. And the way it is in human society is that the strong oppress the weak, the rich oppress the poor. So those societies, which I joke about sometimes, that where the women have to go and carry the water in. I mean, it's self-evident that the men in the breakup of the work should carry the water. We're bigger and stronger. But why do women do it? Because men don't want to. And we force the women to do it. And religion will be used to oppress women, and has been and is. I do think there are remarkable contrasts between... Now let me go. There are no doubt some things that Muhammad does with women that are a relief in the time, particularly the treatment of young baby girls, etc. But there are, within the hadiths, the sayings of the Prophet, and within the Quran itself, but particularly in the hadiths, which are absolutely essential to the functioning of Islam, there are statements that, if I'd be happy to recount some of them, which would just offend people, so different to the way in which Jesus deals with women, which is one of the reasons they kill him, because he lets women touch him. He calls them into the very inner circle of his discipleship. They are the first witness of his resurrection by his choice. He appears to... So there is a... I think Jesus and Muhammad are a study of... Now, there are some good things that Muhammad does, but there are conversations he has with Islamic women recorded in the hadiths where he goes through and outlines why they are not as good as men. And in one of the hadiths, he saw into heaven. I saw it was mostly poor people. I looked into hell, and it was mostly women. And that particular statement, now even if it's not true, and Muslims will tend in our day to say that's not a very good hadith, but there are many, many, many of that, of the way in which... So yes, I think that's enough for the time being.
Sure. Well, I think
I feel like a rat, because I love this guy. I've only known him for 2 weeks. One of the nicest men I've ever met, and I feel as if, I'm just being rude.
It's appropriate. Obviously, Diaa, you need to respond to what Ian said. And I mean, I think for most Westerners in Australia, I think one of the things we do struggle with is the superficial, perhaps, understanding that we have that women seem to be suppressed in Middle Eastern cultures. But please, correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with Ian on that.
Inconceivable.
And don't ever feel like you can't say anything. Anything you feel this is what it's for, you can say whatever you want, and that's why...
it still feels rude, though.
No, go ahead. But Islam absolutely does not degrade women. In fact, Islam was a religion that gave women their rights. At the time of the Arabs and the time of Meccans, women were regarded as assets. You buy a few, sell a few, we'll give you 2 of these for 6 of these. Literally. You could marry women by the hundreds. And previous prophets in the Old Testament as well did have several hundred concubines and wives and whatnot. Islam gave women their rights. In fact, the Arabs used to bury newborn baby girls because it was shameful. Having a girl was shameful. And then the Prophet Muhammad came and said, and Islam taught that women are equal to men. Now, when I say equal, there's certain things men can't do that women can, and women can't do that. We can't give birth to children. Sure. It's a simple fact. But for example, the Prophet Muhammad said, the best of you who have the best character are the ones who are best to their wife. Whoever raises 3 righteous daughters is guaranteed a place in paradise. Okay, so the greatest scholar in Islam, one of the greatest scholars in Islam, the greatest teacher in Islam, is a woman.
Who?
Aisha, the Prophet's wife.
Oh, okay.
She was one of the greatest teachers of Islam. So Islam gave women their rights, and in fact, he was mocked by the Arabs when he came up with when he came with the news that women are treated equally. You can't marry them and discard them and whatever. They have to be clothed.
I mean, let me just.
Can I just tell you the difference between now the perception now? See, a lot of people get confused between Islam and Arabs. All right, it's a cultural thing.
Okay.
Arab Christians, Arab Jews, Arab Muslims. they have a tendency to act a certain way with women, different to say what Malaysians, what Indonesians, what Pakistanis might do, what Afghans might do. It's very cultural, and unfortunately, the thing about Islam is that it got rid of nationalism. Okay, so no matter what tribe, because obviously Arabia was a very tribal area, no matter what tribe you were from, you were equal. And in fact, they got the Muslims from 2 tribes and made them brothers. Right now, unfortunately, Islam has we're back into tribalism. Okay, you can only judge Muslims by what Islam teaches. Okay, and Islam teaches, you know, if I really had more time, I'd tell you all the teachings and all the sayings of the Prophet that gave women their rights and the high regard that Muhammad ﷺ and God Almighty gave to women in the Quran.
But this is where I say, you know, I don't know about text, and I don't put much weight on text. I look at almost theocratic regimes overseas, and they're pretty ugly, you know, violent, misogynist. And I know that sounds harsh, but and I know that I see these through the filter of the Western media, which is, you know, misleading at best and probably wrong most of the time. But, you know, that is part of the demonising of Islam, is how Islam is practiced in other countries, be it the violence or the apparent misogyny. That is a difficult thing. And it's not just Islam. We know that, you know, I can quote you Jewish texts that are violent and misogynist. And yet, you know, Jews that I know aren't violent misogynists.
I'd like to
that's
take...
why I say I wonder how powerful text is. And, like, you know, the classic is, you go and ask people, do you believe in the 10 Commandments? They say yes. You say, what are they?
I don't know, but there are 10 of them. Yeah.
Good.
I'd like to, time is going to beat us as usual, but I'd like to take the discussion now on a different tangent. If each of you had the opportunity to lay out your vision for Australia, based on your atheism, your Islam, your Christianity, what would you hope? How would Australia be different if we were all atheists, all Muslims, all Christians? Ian, do you want to start?
No, I can't even imagine it. And there's nothing in the New Testament that would cause me to think that would ever happen. It's never the plan of Jesus that he would take over the world. The expectation is that Christians will be as they were for the first 300 years, when Christianity grew from about a dozen people to, it was an extraordinary growth. Rodney Stark, a non-Christian historian, sociologist, has looked at this amazing growth and why it happened. Completely without the sword, on the wrong side of the sword. It's always the expectation of Jesus that it will be a small group of people, often despised, usually despised, being like salt in meat, making what difference it can. The heart of the Christian thing is about the death of Jesus, where you love your enemy, you do it by pouring your life out for them, above all by dying for those, even as they hate you. So the Christian position will always be, in whatever little way we can, to seek to serve at great personal cost the needy, the broken, the outcast. We've got a little bit of a history of doing that. But I would think it will be a society that is concerned for those things. And I don't imagine it will be all that different in some of those hopes.
Okay. Well, Diaa, and I wonder if you could lay out, if Islam were to become more prevalent in Australia, what are the sort of the cultural, the way that you'd like to see it evolve, and if you wouldn't mind commenting on, as the questions have come, on Sharia law as well, and the place that would have in your vision for our society.
Well, it's sort of a two-pronged question. Are we asking if Australia were all Muslims, what would that be like? Or are we asking if Sharia laws came to Australia, what that would be like?
I'll leave it to you to embellish.
Well, look, as a Muslim and as someone who believes that, you know, God Almighty's law, it supersedes any other man-made law, you know, as a believer of the Creator, I can't say that the Created has a better system than the Creator. It just doesn't make sense. So I think if Muslims, or if the population lived like true Islam taught, true Islam, not the Islam that we all think that we know now. The true Islam, back to the teachings, back into the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, I think it would be a perfect society. Would it be, when I'm saying perfect, you're not going to have people holding hands and skipping and singing, Kumbaya, but, the law is fair, right? And like I said, as a believer that the source of the law came from the Creator, it has to be right. So there will still be mischief. Yeah. Just because the law's great doesn't mean that people following the law are equally as great.
Okay, so is your ideal scenario that Sharia law would, in a sense, replace the Judeo-Christian legal framework?
Yes. Yes, okay. Basically, because every prophet came to his people with a law and a teaching. Abraham came to his people, Noah came to his people, Jesus came to his people. They all came to their people, sent by God Almighty, with a message relevant to that time for that people. For example, when Jesus says, "I have not come but for the lost sheep house of Israel," he came for those people. He came to save those people, take them out from the misguided path and bring them back to the straight path. What we say and what we claim is that Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon them all, came with the final revelation and is the seal of the prophets, and came with the law now for all of mankind and not just for his people. And that's why the Quran says, "We have not sent you but unto almost all of mankind."
Okay.
Can I say that on that thing about Matthew 15? And I've written to you, that's a complete misuse of that statement of Jesus when Jesus is talking to a Syrophoenician woman who uses a very Jewish... It says, read in Matthew 15, he's not for a second. That's the gospel where he ends up saying, "All authority in heaven has been given to me, go and make disciples of all nations." So to try and make out that Jesus just comes to the house of Israel is a complete mischief.
Okay. Well, I realise you've made a comment to contradict, but I think for time I do need to go to Dick now. If we all gave up on our superstitions and embraced rationalism to its extreme and got rid of God, etc., how would Australia look any different? What values would you want us to aspire to?
Well, see, I'm not an evangelical atheist.
Just use a bit of imagination.
I'm sort of tempted to say monochromatic and boring.
Yeah.
That would be the stereotype. The interest in a community comes from history and diversity. Look at where we're sitting now, this beautiful historic thing that would never have been preserved and used in the same way in a godless world. So, I never have to confront that reality, though, because my overwhelming feeling is that humans are religious people and that atheism will not triumph, come in triumph and take over Australia. I just, I forget who now, describes religion as like our rivers. It's invisible and underground and surfaces only usually in floods of suffering. I think it's... I have never turned my mighty mind to that nirvana where we got rid of God.
Yeah. Okay, no, fair enough. We've all been engaged here on the panel in billboards.
The billboards.
The billboards, and maybe we should come back to that. We began with that. We've only got a few minutes left, so I think this will be sort of where we're heading towards to finish off. Freedom of speech. Do we all agree that it's appropriate that in this country we should be able to have whatever we want on billboards in Australia? Can I just get a quick answer to that? Do we agree with that or not?
Yeah, no, I don't believe in freedom of speech.
You don't? Okay.
No, there's defamation rules. There's racial vilification rules. I don't think I should be able to vilify Muslims and Christians.
That's right.
Okay.
I don't believe in freedom of speech. It's a glib saying that I believe in freedom of speech. What I believe in is qualified freedom of speech. I don't believe I'm allowed to organise a group of terrorists to come and bomb churches. I just don't think I have that right.
That might be freedom of expression, possibly.
Yeah. But even meeting to plan it is and if it's not, should be a criminal offence.
Yeah. Okay, fair call. Maybe let's limit freedom of speech to those three posters in particular. Were they permissible. One about Jesus, Prophet of Islam, one about put down no religion, one about, hey, Aussie Muslims, ... Were those three fair
Can
posters?
I just clarify the atheism one? Because it's quite interesting.
Yeah. Make it quick.
At a census or two ago, a lot of people who weren't believers put down that they were Star Trek followers.
Jedis.
They were Jedi warriors. So all it was saying is,
2001.
Yeah.
don't say you're a Jedi warrior.
Don't play silly buggers. Just okay.
Can I just quickly answer that? I think that no, I don't think you should allow to put anything you want on billboards. I think you should put anything you want as if it doesn't offend. People say, well, the Jesus billboard that I put up offended Christians. I didn't bring Christianity into it. I'm just stating a fact that in Islam, Jesus is a prophet.
Yeah.
I think what Ian did too was of the utmost respect and the best way possible. So, and look what it generated. It generated 3 people here from different walks of life, completely different beliefs, to be able to sit there and have a forum in front of the publics. And neither one of the 3, I believe, offended anyone or any one group.
Yeah, I actually learned a lot from your poster. I didn't realise that, Jesus is mentioned more in the Quran than Muhammad. So who'd have known that?
No,
I didn't. But I confronted you with this question yesterday. I'll confront you with it today. The first part of the question is that my son's first reaction was, nice idea, but Christians would have been turned off by that. And secondly, I want to ask you, would you be happy, or would your community allow you to repudiate violence, Al-Qaeda, and, say, the state-sponsored terrorism of the Iranian regime? Would they allow you to say, blowing up Bali was evil, and I condemn it?
I don't have to say it. It's in the Quran. And if any leader was to say it, you wouldn't hear about it because it wouldn't make the headlines. And that's just truthful. Anything that bad happens, if the community leaders of the Muslims anyway stand up and say we condemn it, you won't hear about it. If they say we support it, it'll be on the front page. And it's just a fact of life. We accept that, we admit that, but you don't need to go to our community leaders. I could stand right here and say, you know what, Bali was well-deserved, 9/11 was well-deserved, and then you're going to vilify all the Muslims. Who am I to speak on 1.7 billion Muslims? Don't judge me, don't judge some crazy people that you might hear. You want to know if Bali and 9/11 will pick up the Quran, and it says if you take the life of an innocent human, it's like you've taken the life of mankind.
I think Dick's comment, though, sorry to interrupt, is that in terms of achieving your objective of establishing Islam in mainstream Australia, you'd earn more points, correct me if I'm wrong here, if you came out with a clear billboard distancing yourself from those extreme acts. Would you be prepared to do such a billboard?
That's almost like, and forgive if this is a bad analogy, I'm not very good with analogies, the Catholic bishops putting up a billboard saying we don't condone child molestation. Of course they don't condone it. There's a few bishops that did it, but we don't say all of Catholicism is child molestation.
It may not be a bad poster for them.
I think they should do that.
That probably wouldn't be a bad poster.
But it'd be silly because you're defending something that we all know is not a part of the Catholic way of life. Don't defend it. Actions of a few. That's fine. It's not. We just So
Okay.
for me to say I don't condone terrorism.
Islam really did well with Moz and Mo.
Moz and Mo.
Fair dinkum, Moz and Mo. No one knows this, but in popular culture, there's a show called what is it? Travel Around the World. Amazing Race.
Yeah.
And there are these 2 fat Muslim guys who were the cutest guys in the world, and they were. Moz and Mo rhymes with slow, and they got kicked out too quickly. But they were great ambassadors.
We're going to have to wrap up actually right now. So I'm just going to give each of you an opportunity to say your final words. Ian,
what's awkward in this is, having spent some decades now reading the Quran, reading Islamic books, reading Islamic biographies of Muhammad from the best sources, head to Martin Ling's, a Sufi scholar. My problem is that, and I have all sorts of quotes here from Islamic scholars who say that, of course, violence is at the very heart of Surah 9 and many other hadiths. And Surah 9 is one which I want to suggest, and I often say this at parties. Read Surah 9. It's probably most scholars think it's the last of the chapters revealed. It's not tied up to that particular early stage. It mocks Muslim men for not going a distance to fight. It says they'll go to hell if they don't. I want to suggest to people, my problem is this: I love all the Muslims I've met. I love Arabs. They're just a passionate. I know it sounds patronising and even racist to say it. My problem is that the more I read the life of Muhammad, where he comes back from battle covered in blood, gives his sword to his 9-year-old wife who washes it, he washes Abu Bakr's sword, and whole tribes of Jews wiped out in Saudi Arabia. And it's not just there were some battles, but you just read the first 100 years of Islam where it swept, Egypt became Islam behind the sword, Palestine did, Syria. So what I'm saying is, the problem is that Christianity at its heart and guts, in the keel of the boat, is something that when the winds of violence and sociology affect it, that will bring it back and we'll say, that stinks, everyone knows it's not Jesus. My thing is to read Surah 9, read some of the hadiths. The problem, I think, is not with Muslims, it's actually with the very source documents, and that's why I had all these quotes from Islamic experts, and that the man who killed Van Gogh's great said, the Prophet Muhammad commands me, and this is the thing would have been good to talk about. The way in which the Quran is so full of calls for universal violence. Most Muslims don't do it, which is great, but whereas Jesus he's a wimp. He dies. He gets beaten. Anyhow, but
we're going to have to stop there.
Can I just quick 10 seconds?
Please.
Michael H. Hart wrote a book. He's an American. Wrote a book on the 100 most influential men, 100 greatest men. And at number 1, he put the Prophet Muhammad, peace and peace be upon him. He said, never has a man achieved being a leader, a father, a statesman, a legislator. Ian's referred to that Muhammad came back, a warrior, coming back with blood on him. I don't know about you, I much prefer that the man that's leading a war actually leads it, and not from a house making a phone call and leads other people to lead it. If you're going to call for a war, be prepared to fight in it yourself. And I think that's a mark of a good leader and not a fault. It's actually a positive. And I encourage you, and don't only read Surah 9, but read other parts of the Quran. You know what the Quran says about jihad? Go to J in the index and it'll tell you every verse in the Quran that refers to jihad. And then you'll make a decision for yourself of what Islam stands for, because it doesn't stand about tormenting the world and violence across the world or anything like that. Just go to jihad, that really bad word that we put with so many things. Go to J, look it up, and then you'll just judge for yourself what the Quran says. And look up the book Michael H. Hart, 100 Greatest Men, and find out why he's put Muhammad at number 1. You'll be interested to find out who's number 2 and 3, by the way, but I won't mention it now.
Thank you. We are pretty much done out of time, but I don't want to let you go without a final word. Dick, is there anything you want to say?
Yeah, well, look, all three of us are sitting here. We're all representing traditions that are soaked in blood from the extremism, unnecessary evangelism, and what the challenge going forward is to go back to source documents, find out what's still relevant and meaningful that does not necessarily lead to extremism and bloodthirsty behaviour. And that's the challenge.
Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking our panellists.